looking at this clock here, and it actually reminds me of a really interesting riddle that actually I'll come back to the clock and see if the riddle will actually help us resolve it. This riddle is tricky, really tricky. All right, let's have some fun and see if we can be fooled by the riddle or not. So the question is, the riddle is, what time is it when the hour hand and the minute hand are both to the same number? Now, we have two guesses. Aiden says that happens at 6:30. Miller says it happens at 12 o'clock. Well, his answer is correct. Well, let's see that, in fact, this is so sneaky that, in fact, we can understand why both guesses are good guesses. So, first of all, let me just magically have a clock face appear with no big hand or small hand. Are you ready? Let's go. Bling. There we have it. Now, let's think of Aiden's guess, 6:30. So, first of all, that means that the little hand, which tells the hours, will be pointing to 6. 6. There's 6. 6. And what about the big hand, which is telling minutes? Now remember, we count minutes by counting by 5s. So if we were to count to 30 and start here, then we have 5, and if you start counting, you could actually... And we see we're starting here. Now this is 5, 10, 15, and then what comes after 15? Well, that would come 20, then 25, and this is 30. Aha! So that means that the hour hand, or the minute hand rather, which is the long one, the minute hand, which is the long one, will be pointing right here, which is also 6. And so look, Aiden guessed it would happen at 6:30, and that's what he was thinking. This looks really good. But this is so sneaky, because let's just think about what happened in time. This is a question about time, after all. When it was 6 o'clock, this blue minute hand was pointing up at the 12, right? 0 minutes. So they were exactly opposite. The little hand was pointing to the 6, and that big blue hand was pointing right above it in the opposite direction. Now, remember we had to count all the way, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30? Well, as we were doing that, we actually were waiting. It took us 30 minutes, which is a half of an hour, which meant that little hand wasn't just sitting there. That little hand is always traveling, and it's going to be moving towards 7, and it'll hit 7 an hour later, which means that in that half of an hour it took us to get to 30 minutes, that little teeny hour hand was moved and actually was now halfway between 6 and 7. So the real time, 6:30, would look like this. Look how sneaky this is. Do you see that the minute hand gets to the 6 30 minutes after the hour, but then the hour hand is already halfway in between the 6 and the 7, and so we see that, in fact, the minute hand and the hour hand are not on top of each other, so they're not pointing the same way. But it was a great guess that Aiden had, but the thing is, the hands do not point to the same number, and so Aiden is incorrect. Now, what about Camilla? Well, Camilla guessed 12 o'clock. Well, 12 o'clock, that means that it's the top of the hour, and in fact, the hour is 12, which means, in fact, they are both pointing to 12 o'clock. So, in fact, Camilla is correct. Ta-da! Camilla wins this battle. But it's great because I thought Aiden's guess really also allowed us to to see something really interesting. And so even though I like Camilla's guess as being correct, we also like Aiden's incorrect guess. And in fact, let me actually act this out for us. So let's take and see that this really does happen, so you can kind of see that time and then see why Camilla is correct. So I'm going to come back to the clock. Then, what do I see? Well, let's see what happens as we get to 6 o'clock. Now, notice that when we get to 6 o'clock, the hour hand will circle the number 6, and the minute hand will be exactly at the opposite spot. You see how they're exactly opposite now? So they're pointing to the exact, kind of opposite numbers. But now watch what happens. As the minute hand is going to make its journey down, which will take 30 minutes, but we're going to speed it up now. Watch what happens to the circle that's now circling the 6. It's going to move off the 6. Check it out. You see how it's moving off the 6? You can see it for yourself. Moving off the 6, moving off the 6, moving off the 6. And now it's actually halfway in between the 6 and the 7. And in fact, we see that the circle is in fact now in between when in fact the minute hand is at the 6. And if we speed up and see what happens when we get to 12 o'clock, let's see what happens. Here we go. See, time flies when you're doing math. Isn't that great? I love it. Well, we're getting close to midnight or noon, and look what happens at 12 o'clock. Bang! The circle lines up perfectly with the 12, and the minute hand is lining up perfectly with the hour hand, and so we see that, in fact, Camilla was right. But it's really neat that you can actually visualize that for yourself. It's kind of cool that you could actually see all that for yourself and realize that there is a lot of math in even telling time. Have fun watching time fly, which means you're